All right, so today I'm going to be going over a summary pretty much of chapter 5 in Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility book. And chapter 5 talks about the good bad binary. So, after the civil rights movement in the late mid 1900s, racists were defined, I'm air quoting, as old white Southerners, and the younger, more open-minded Northerners were considered to be not racist. And what this binary does is it leads to people defending themselves against being racist, instead of self-reflecting and taking it upon themselves to look inwards. So it makes it impossible to understand and interpret racism, essentially, because racism is a systemic, societal, institutional, constant idea, not something at the individual level. So it's not individuals being good or bad, being racist or not racist. It is a systemic issue embedded in our society for pretty much as long as the world or we've existed. And no matter how much we don't practice individual acts of racism, we are still affected by the forces of racism as a member of society where racism is the bedrock. Like I said, it's been there basically as long as we have. So as white people, we have white experiences and a white perspective which profoundly shape us. And we can't avoid that. That's who we are. So what we need to do is we need to let go of the belief that racism is individual and that it's defined by individual acts. And we need to do this if we want to challenge the system. So basically, the defensiveness that white people take when we're called out for our offensive behavior, white people don't want to be racists. This is White Fragility, the name of her book. White people find it very uncomfortable to talk about race. They defend themselves when they're called offensive or racist because they just don't want to be racist. But like I said, it's something that we can't really shed 100%, especially if we're doing this. So Robin DiAngelo gives two commonly used pieces of evidence that white individuals use to show how they're not racist. The first one is color blindness. So color blindness is people saying, well, I don't see color. White people and black people look the same to me. Color has no importance to me. And then the second one is valuing diversity. So an example would be like, oh, I have a lot of black friends, so I can't be racist. But these are two totally fallacious ways of thinking. Obviously, color is visible, and you shouldn't even pretend to not see it. And just because you have friends that are peoples of color does not mean that you don't practice behavior that's oppressive. And so hiding behind these two ideas kind of protects the racial status quo in America. And what we need to do is we need to do inner reflection and reflect on our practices and our prejudices and discrimination. And Robin DiAngelo doesn't even say that treating everyone equally is the answer. She actually uses a metaphor or an analogy, I guess, that you wouldn't give a person whose sight isn't great a document with 12-point font, even though that's what you would give everyone else, because they need different accommodations. So maybe what a person of color needs is completely different than what white people need. And since white people have been ahead for so long, oftentimes people of color need special supports. And so DiAngelo says that we should be extra conscious and self-examining when we're with people of color. Deep reflection won't even free us of our inevitable unconscious, inequitable treatment of others, but it gets us so much closer than flat out denial, which is what we often just tend to do. DiAngelo even admits that she still does and says racially problematic things, albeit less common than she had previously. But if she, someone who studies this and thinks about it constantly, still does this, that just means that it's kind of impossible for us to completely escape this. But the best thing to do is still critically examine our own behavior to get us that much closer. She said she likes to operate under the idea that racism is a continuum, and if we think about where we are and how we act on this continuum, we can help move further along it instead of just prolonging the racial good bad binary, which doesn't really exist, like she's saying. So she finished off with a couple other points. She said that there are a couple other fallacies that white people like to hide behind. Sometimes they say that when they're the numerical minority and experience negative treatment, that they can be victims of racism. But DiAngelo calls them out and says that this isn't racist. It is prejudicial, and they are victims of discrimination. But because racism is a systemic thing and that whites are at the top of society, that this isn't technically constituted as racism. And she also, at the end, talks about children and how even children aren't exempt from biases as they're shaped by their environments as well. And children are born into the system that we are in, and it is a racist system. So children even have biases towards specific races and specific ideas based off that. So her final message, and really the whole message of the chapter, is just to look inwards, constantly examine how you are thinking and acting upon race. We have implicit biases as white people. We're always going to have perspectives of white people. So we need to do our best to think about what it is to not be white and just work towards going towards a equitable racial system, which probably won't happen in our lifetime. But we need to start having uncomfortable conversations about race and about being white so we can start making steps in the right direction.